There was a time when the world moved without thinking machines. No prompts, no automatic recommendations, no voices from screens that knew what we wanted before we did. And yet, people didn't just survive. They created, dreamed, built. Slower, perhaps. Harder, often. But always, more human. This is the story of what life was like before artificial intelligence became part of our everyday existence. And maybe, it's a reminder of who we still can be, if we turn off the machines for a moment and stay alone with ourselves. Once, information had weight. It didn't fly past in seconds. You had to search for it, page by page, step by step, conversation by conversation. When people wanted the truth, they didn't open a chat. They went to a library, where every smell of paper reminded you. Knowledge is a journey, not a click. Libraries were silent, but it wasn't the silence of boredom, it was the silence of concentration. People didn't just find answers there, they found new questions. There was respect for the process. A librarian could know more than any search algorithm. He looked at you and understood, not what you asked, but what you were truly trying to find. He was a living filter who saw the human behind the query. And every page you found was a triumph. A small victory over ignorance. Information didn't scroll, it settled into your memory. A memory that smelled of ink, cardboard, and patience. The world without AI moved slower. But in that slowness lived something rare, the taste of the process. People planned trips not in minutes but in evenings. They sat with maps, marked routes with pencils, listened to the stories of those who'd already been there. There was no optimal route. There was choice, over mountains or along the coast, shorter but harder, or longer with better views. Each path was an adventure that began long before the journey itself. And when you stood somewhere on a night road, holding a map the wind tried to steal from your hands, you felt something we've almost lost today: presence. You didn't follow an arrow on a screen, you followed yourself. Once, people spoke with their eyes. Not through messages, emojis, or reactions to stories. They met, they talked in person, and every word had weight, because no one could delete it. Letters were slow, but real. To write one, you had to think. To send it, you had to feel. The reply didn't arrive instantly. It took time, and that waiting made the conversation deeper. People told each other the news. Not by forwarding links, but by retelling stories in their own words. Each retelling was alive. Each word carried a shade of personality. Sometimes inaccurate, but always human. When there were no translators in your pocket, people learned languages. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to understand others. Language wasn't a barrier, it was a doorway. And when you opened it, your world expanded. Without AI, people relied on something else, their own minds. Intuition, experience, and something almost forgotten today: patience. Decisions weren't made by algorithms, they were made by people. Mistakes hurt, but they taught lessons. Without data-driven predictions, people created their own rules. If it's getting dark, head home. If the birds fly low, it's going to rain. If you feel uneasy, listen to that feeling. These were small, ancient algorithms of human nature, passed down not through code, but through conversation. Sometimes inaccurate, but remarkably wise. And every decision had a human face behind it. Not a system, but a heart. Not calculation, but instinct. And when things worked out, it was your victory, not a machine's. Once, creativity was slow, but deep. There were no programs that made art, music, or text in a minute. There were hands, tools, and imagination. Musicians wrote notes by hand. Directors edited film reels physically. Writers stayed up through the night, weighing every word, because it couldn't just be deleted. And in that difficulty, something real was born. Mistakes weren't failures, they were part of the creation. What couldn't be undone with a click, had to be lived through. Creativity without AI was an act of faith, in yourself, an inspiration, in the power to make something out of nothing. And every work carried a piece of its creator, his time, his struggle. Today, we create faster, but do we feel the same? Education without AI looked different too. Knowledge wasn't consumed, it was earned. A student didn't search for the answer, they learned how to think. Teachers were more than instructors, they were guides. They didn't just explain, they helped you see. Sometimes strict, sometimes inspiring, but always real. Because they were there, with you. Textbooks were simple, but every page had meaning. You didn't scroll through material, you worked through it. Notebooks carried handwriting, personality etched in ink. Every mistake was a step toward understanding. Without automatic corrections or AI grading, people learned to reason on their own. Not fast, but deeply. And maybe that's why their memory was stronger, and their logic clearer. Business and work before AI were stories of trust. Of words that meant more than contracts. Of handshakes that carried more weight than signatures. People built careers through meetings, conversations, reputation. There were no CRMs, no client analytics. There were humans with tempers, flaws, dreams. A single mistake could cost dearly, but gratitude was priceless too. Business was personal. Agreements stood not on conditions, but on honor. It took more time, but it created belonging. You knew who you worked with. You knew there was a story behind every decision, not a cold line of code. There was no predictive analytics for sales. But there were instincts, and those who listened to people became leaders. Today we call it emotional intelligence. Back then, it was simply being attentive, looking into someone's eyes, hearing what their words didn't say, and that attention held society together. Life without AI was chaotic, but real. People made mistakes, lost things, tried again, and every attempt had value, because behind it was a story, not data. Without smartwatches, people felt time differently. Not in minutes, but in moments. Not by counting steps, but by the depth of a day lived fully. And yet, in the absence of technology, there was harmony. People lived closer to nature, to rhythm, to their own hearts. Mornings didn't start with notifications, but with silence. With the smell of coffee, sunlight on the window, a conversation that could last an hour. No rush, no metrics, no analytics. But there was also the other side. The world without AI demanded effort. A mistake could cost weeks of work. Information could be lost. People spent lifetimes searching for what we now find in seconds. And yet, because of that, they learned to value results. When something took effort, it gained meaning. And maybe meaning is what we've lost the most, now that everything is too easy. Artificial intelligence gave us power, but took away part of the journey. And losing the journey means losing experience. We no longer feel the joy of discovery, because discovery is instant. We no longer feel pride in solving problems, because the algorithm solved them first. We've forgotten the sound of a thought born in silence. Maybe that's why today we need to look back. Not to return, but to remember who we were before the machines learned to think for us. Once, the world worked slower, but with more precision. Not precision in data, but in meaning. Every letter, every song, every painting wasn't content. It was an event. When an artist painted, he didn't think of algorithms. He simply wanted to say something to the world. And that made art dangerous. Alive, unpredictable. Today AI paints, writes, and even mimics voices. And it's astonishing. But sometimes, in all those perfect forms, something is missing. A crack. And in that crack, life lives. People without AI made mistakes. And through those mistakes, they evolved. They searched not only for answers, but for meaning. And when they found it, it became personal, not informational. We now live in a world where machines can do almost everything. But there are still things beyond their reach. Gratitude, compassion, laughter, silence, all the things that cannot be measured. And if one day we find ourselves without machines again, our past will be the only thing that saves us. Our ability to think, to seek, to feel, to trust. To be human. People without AI knew that life wasn't about efficiency. It was about the path. And as they walked it, they felt every step, even the wrong ones. We, on the other hand, often don't even feel our victories. Because they come with a single click. Maybe the true challenge of the future is not creating the smartest machine, but keeping the wisest part of ourselves. A machine can calculate, predict, imitate, but it cannot remember like a human. It cannot dream like a child. It cannot believe like a heart. Once, we lived without AI, and maybe that was when we were closest to ourselves. We lived slower, but deeper. Less accurate, but more real. And in that, lay our strength. Because if humanity could create everything we have today, without machines, without prompts, without neural networks, then maybe the greatest intelligence was never artificial. It was human. Silence. A few seconds of pause. And when you turn off your screen, the world begins to look like the one people once lived in, without AI. A world where it's enough to look around, to listen, to feel, and to remember, we haven't lost ourselves yet.